Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by Audible.com. You go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. You go there, you sign up for free, and you get yourself a free audiobook, and it helps support the show. Tonight we're live on CJMarsRadio.com, 365 Live, HazyRadio.com, and then throughout the week you can find us on ParaX Radio, on Saturday night, 7 p.m. We will rebroadcast on Awake Radio US, Shake and Wake Radio, Firehorse Radio, WTRU Radio, and Penny Entertainment. By the way, Penny Entertainment is on Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, okay? So we got that straight. Now, tonight our guests are Gary Stewart and Susan D. Mustafa, okay? And they're the author of the book, The Most Dangerous Animal of All, Searching for My Father and Finding the Zodiac Killer. Okay, it's a fascinating book because Gary went searching for his father, his birth father, his biological father, and he discovered that it was the Zodiac Killer. Susan is a true crime author, and she wrote the book Dismembered. She also wrote a book called I've Been Watching You, the South Louisiana Serial Killer. And go to, right now, do yourself a favor, go to the Opperman Report blog right now. You just go to Google, you type in the Opperman Report, and you'll find a link to the Amazon.com link for that book. I've Been Watching You, the South Louisiana Killer, and check out the picture on the cover of that book. You won't believe it. You're going to have nightmares watching that book, that picture on that book. She's also the author of a book called Bloodbath. Okay, now last week, guys, we had the Reverend Edward Pinkney, okay? And by the way, he came to us through our sponsors in Mexico, the New World Mexican Women, and the Reverend is going to trial. I believe it's this Monday. I think it's October 27th, okay? And he needs our prayers. He needs our financial support. He's facing 20 years in prison on these trumped-up voter fraud charges, okay? And this is a guy who's been out there struggling his whole life. This is not a young man, okay? He's older than me. He's an elderly man. Struggling and fighting his whole life for your rights, for my rights, for our civil rights, for the rights of the poor. And now he's facing 20 years in prison. This is no joke, okay? He needs our support. So go to the Opperman Report blog and scroll down to the middle of the page. You'll find his the show we did about him. And you can click on the link to his blog and donate some money. But keep him in your prayers. Next week, we're kind of scrambling, okay, because the New World Mexican Women down in Guerrero, Mexico, they're trying to find us a guest, like a journalist down there, that can talk to us about the 45 kidnappings of these students down there in Guerrero. This is where they live, in that town. There's been 43 kidnapped students. And the people of the town have been protesting. They set the city government building on fire. The mayor's on the run. The police chief is on the run because these kidnappings are connected to the police department down there, to drug gangs that own the police department. The mayor hightailed it out of town, and with his wife, the police chief took off. And there's mass graves down there. You don't hear this stuff on the news at all, okay? Again, we need your prayers. These New World Mexican Women, they're supporters of the show. We're their supporters, and they need our help down there. Now, you can find all the old shows. You go to YouTube. You look up the Opperman Report channel. You subscribe. You can find us on Spreaker.com and also iHeartRadio.com. All the shows are archived on all those stations. But here tonight we have with us, we're doing a show about the Zodiac Killer, and we have with us Gary Stewart and Suzanne Mustafa. Guys, are you there?
Here.
Yes, we're here.
Okay, great. Now, what I'd like you to do is give us a little introduction about yourself. I don't know who wants to go first, either Gary or Susan. It's up to you guys. And just tell us about yourself and your life and what you're about.
Gary, you can go.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having us as guests tonight, Ed. What a pleasure. I've been watching you, following you for a while, so thanks again. I grew up in what I would have described as a normal family setting in Baton Rouge, as normal as that could be. I was played sports in grade school, high school, and after high school went to Louisiana State University, graduated in electrical engineering, and have practiced in that field and in the business and business management for the past, and surprises me now, nearly 30 years,
Wow.
29 years this December. I am married to my lovely wife, Christy, and have a son who is my baby boy, but he's now 22 years old. So, and he works in our business with me.
Yeah, time flies, huh? 30 years goes by like nothing, huh?
I'm telling you.
I know, man. So, Susan, why don't you tell us about yourself? I know you're a true crime author.
Yes, thank you for having us. I grew up in Slidell, Louisiana, right across Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans, and I've lived in Baton Rouge since 2000. I am an investigative journalist. I have a degree in journalism and mass communications from Southeastern Louisiana University. When I came to Baton Rouge in 2000, I moved here because my sister told me it was such a safe city. I had no idea that I would eventually be writing about all of the serial killers in Baton Rouge. So that was a bit of a surprise for me. I am the co-author of Bloodbath. I wrote it with Special Prosecutor Tony Clayton and Sue Israel. Tony prosecuted Derek Todd Lee in West Baton Rouge Parish for the murder of Geraldine Bar DeSoto. Lee was connected by DNA to the murders of 7 women in South Louisiana, although in the book we have him at about 17. I also co-wrote Dismembered with Sue Israel about Sean Vincent Gillis, who is another Baton Rouge serial killer who confessed to the murders and dismemberments of 8 women in South Louisiana. Just a side note, Investigation Discovery will air a show called Twisted Monday night at 9 p.m. about Sean Vincent Gillis. I'm also Gary's co-author for The Most Dangerous Animal of All, which is not only a true crime book, but it's a memoir as well. So it was a little different from what I normally do, but it's a compelling and fascinating story of Gary's search to find his father and all of his discoveries along the way.
Hey, is that Steph Watts doing that over on Discovery Channel?
No, it was
Okay.
not.
Oh, yeah, we had Steph on the show a couple of times. I know he does a lot of work over there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, so now tonight's story is about Zodiac Killer, okay? So who wants to give us the rundown? You know, I know we know all about it, and most of the people listening do, especially my audience. But for the people tuning in that aren't familiar with the Zodiac Killer, who wants to give us the history about the Zodiac killings?
Well,
Gary?
I guess I'll do that. The Zodiac Killer was a California-based serial killer who operated in primarily the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area of California, in the late 1960s and up into the mid 70s. There are 7 known victims, 5 actual murder victims that have been positively attributed to the Zodiac Killer, and which is not a whole lot compared to some of these modern day guys we find out about all the time, right? Five is such a small amount relatively speaking, to be such an infamous serial killer. But he also had his signature and his calling card were the letters that he sent to the press to brag of his crimes, and then some of the cryptic puzzles that he sent with one time hidden message, and other times some that still remain unsolved, but then others that he said, I'll hide my identity in these ciphers. So I think just the sheer the audacity of this killer, and the way he took it right in the face of the media and the public, in the heart of the city, with the fear in the school buses, is what set him apart. And I guess because he was never caught, makes him one of the most infamous serial killers, if not the most infamous serial killer in American history.
Yeah, it definitely has the public's attention, and it's held the public's attention for 30 years, I guess, right? It's been about 30 years, hasn't it?
45
Yeah,
or more.
45 years,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's so many people. When you get a case like the Zodiac or the Manson trial or JFK assassination, it gathers all these fans, these true crime fans who debate incessantly,
Yeah.
nonstop on these message boards and stuff like that. And they're married to their opinion, their theory on the case. And
Absolutely.
oh my God, it's just amazing. But I love them. Uh, so now what happened? I know what happened with you. You were adopted.
Yes.
Tell us a story about how you came to be adopted and came to be abandoned and all that kind of stuff.
So I was raised in an adoptive family. All I knew as I became old enough, and I'm guessing that's grade school or somewhere along in there, that I had an older sister or have an older sister who's adopted as well. And my parents, the only parents I've ever known, my adoptive parents, Lloyd and Leona Stewart, they adopted my sister and me because they did not think that they were uh, able to have a biological child together. Just wasn't in God's plan. And in fact, they adopted another baby girl prior to my older sister. And it's part of the story. They lost her when she was just 13 months old in a tragic car accident.
Oh my
And
God.
so, all I knew was adoption, and certainly didn't know anything about the how I came to be available to be adopted, because here in the state of Louisiana, the adoption records are sealed, or were sealed back in the late 60s and 70s, and open adoption wasn't even heard of back then. So I, although I wanted to search and find out who my biological parents were, I had no tools at my disposal to do that. I didn't even have a name. Um, so
Let me ask you a
in the
question though. Did you ever think of hiring a private investigator? Because there are investigators who specialize in that.
I did, and the reason why I didn't do anything, Ed, is because my older sister, that's adopted as well, she has no desire
Right.
to know who her biological parents were, and she loves, and just as I do, our adopted parents, the Stewarts. And so I think my fear of maybe hurting their feelings by going to look for my biological parents is what held me back. I said, I will wait if I have to. I will wait until they're gone and see what happens. And then, but I didn't have to, because 12 years ago, a lady from San Francisco contacted my parents and said, "I am your son Gary's birth mother."
Now, how was
And
she able to find you?
well, it's you ever heard of Louisiana politics
Oh
before?
yeah, I'm very familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, she was clever, and she says for the cost of a roll of postage stamps, she found somebody who worked in the vital statistics department, who broke the seal basically, and didn't give her anything other than identifying information, meaning my name and my adoptive parents' names. Um, I wish she would have gotten my original birth certificate out of that package and sent that to my biological mother, but because I'm still fighting with the state legislature to try to get the adoption records for adult adoptees wanting to have their original birth certificate released. And so she paid a lady who worked for Vital Records, and the lady ultimately got in quite a heap of trouble. So I don't think those things happen anymore.
Oh
But
no,
that's how she did it.
it happens all the time. It's a whole cottage industry. There's investigators that do this. They specialize in this, and you develop sources right there in the Bureau of Vital Statistics, and to get a peek at the birth certificate, and then you sell it to the client. Goes on every day. I've done it. So yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Go ahead.
Well, Ed, Gary needs his birth certificate.
Well, okay, we'll see what I can do. Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk offline after the show.
Yeah. No, it can definitely be done. Yeah. Okay. Okay, but now, so she found you. Oh no, one more thing I want to say before we get to that, because there's a lot of people are looking for their parents or parents looking for their kids. Sometimes it's not just an adoption situation, but it's also too that they're estranged. You know, there was a divorce, they lost touch with their father, or maybe the parents never got married. And one thing I found, or even when you're looking for a lost loved one, if you're thinking about them, okay, and you have a feeling in your heart, you're longing to connect with that person, almost every single time the other person is feeling the same way. So don't hesitate to try and contact that person.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
just something that it's tugging at my heart at the moment. Okay, so tell us about your parents, your biological parents.
So, my birth mother contacted my adoptive parents, and
Okay.
they took a while because I guess that's a shock, right? Out of the blue, 39 years after, when I was 39 years old, they're thinking, okay, how is this going to affect Gary? We don't want him to be hurt. Certainly, this lady's not going to steal our adult son from us. He will always love us. We will always be his parents. But their concern for me was getting hurt through the process. So they were very careful. They prayed hard for God's wisdom in what to do with this situation. And within 2 weeks, they knew they had their answer. And that's the day they approached me and said, a lady from San Francisco claims to be your birth mother. And they showed me a picture. And I knew instantly this lady was my mother. I mean, the picture she sent me looked just like me. So, now, you want me to tell you about my adoptive parents? They're great people, wonderful people, married 60 years and would be 62 and a half years now if my dad hadn't passed away 2 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, I lost him. I mean, just before the book came out, and he was so proud of the work that I'd done and all these years. I mean, I spent a fifth of my life doing this, 12 years, just trying to get to the truth. I didn't set out to solve a crime. I just wanted to get to the truth. That's the way I was raised. So great people, but my mom, Leona, is still around, healthy, well, happy, loves it when she gets asked to sign her autograph on our book with us because she's such a huge part of the story. So she's 80, almost 83, and I guess she is most responsible for the man I've become today.
Well, God bless her, man. That's great. Okay. So now, your biological parents. Why don't you give us that story? What caused them to give you up?
So, the way my mother described it to me is one day she stepped off the bus, and by bus I'm talking about she was 13 years old. She was coming home from school.
Right.
So she steps off the bus in the middle of this intersection. I know exactly where it is. And she says, and honey, there he was. Well, Susan and I went back to San Francisco a couple of years ago and found out why it was that he was right there. As it turns out, there was a bookstore a rare bookstore right there on that corner of Ninth Avenue and Judah Street in the Sunset District of San Francisco. And my father was a rare book dealer.
Okay.
He bought antiquities and in particular documents from pre-Columbian Mexico and imported them here to the States to several dealers, buyers south of Market there in San Francisco. So he was walking out of the bookstore. She was getting off the school bus, and on the other side of Judah Street, the other corner, there's an ice cream parlor called Herbert's Sherbet Shop. I guess Mom doesn't really remember, but I think he just whisked her right in and they shared an ice cream. So he was 27 at the time. She's 13. This is the 1st of October, 1961. And my mother had come from a tough background, meaning her mom and dad had divorced. Her mother was now married to an Armenian who was quite abusive to my mother's mother, verbally, if nothing else, psychologically. So she wasn't really all about just hanging out at the house. So yes, I guess you could say a juvenile delinquent. Looking for happiness in, well, you would think all the right places, an ice cream parlor. But so she was prime for the picking when my father met her. So they got together and decided that they would see each other. And of course, she couldn't bring him home to Mother. So they kept their dates in secret. They called them, the newspapers called them hamburger dates, but I guess in January of the following year, which is just a couple months later, they decide they're going to elope. And they fly off to Reno, where my father forges some documents and lies about my mother's age, and they are married. And they come home, and my mother calls her mother to share the good news. And so grandmother quickly has my parents' marriage annulled, and she also calls the police. So they married on January 5th, and on February 22nd, he was arrested for rape of a female less than 18 years of age. This did not stop him, though, because although my mother went to juvenile hall for a while, grandmother thinking that would take care of this.
Wait a second. Your mom was the victim of this, and she was sent to juvenile hall by your grandmother or by the court?
Oh, by her mother.
Oh,
now,
boy.
That's one thing, that even my mother tried to get her juvenile records, and it's crazy. I've been there. She wasn't able to get her juvenile records because she was trying to piece back some of the memories for me as well. So from everything we can gather in the police reports and newspaper articles, she went because of her mother. And I think at the time, working as a teller at Crocker Bank there in San Francisco, I don't think my grandmother felt she could adequately watch her daughter. And she had another daughter as well, my Aunt Lynn. So, and they were both a handful. So juvenile hall was the best place as far as she was concerned. And then because I think she felt the romance was over, she actually dropped the charges. They were dismissed until just a few weeks after my 14-year-old mother, or soon-to-be mother, makes a makeshift rope out of bed sheets and shimmies out the second floor of juvenile hall into the arms of my father, who's waiting below, and they take off again.
Wow.
This time they're gone for several months. And when they come back, my father had contracted infectious hepatitis, which is the foodborne disease in Mexico, Acapulco. They did 3 or 4 weeks in Mexico on their quote unquote honeymoon, although it was now annulled. They did try to remarry down there, but they could not prove. They didn't have sufficient documentation for my mother to be able to get remarried. So it was still an illegitimate, illicit romance. They got back to San Francisco. My mother contracted the infectious hepatitis from my father. My father took her to the hospital. He called her mother. She called the police. He's arrested again. They not only do they find out she's contracted the infectious hepatitis, but she's now 3 months pregnant. And so he goes off to county jail, and she goes to the maximum security isolation ward of the San Francisco General Hospital. On August 31st.
Wait. She went to the maximum security what?
Ward. Isolation ward of the San Francisco General Hospital.
Why? She was under arrest again?
Well, I guess because she was ill, grandmother couldn't send her back to juvie, but that's where she was going to go as soon as she got out of the hospital once the hepatitis was gone.
Oh, brother.
So,
let me tell you something real quick. You and I have something in common in that my mother also got married at 14 years old in Cuba.
Really?
Yeah. She married the neighbor. Like her parents gave her to the neighbor to marry.
Really?
Yeah, at 14 years old. Yeah, and she had she had my brother at 16, and the second brother. I had my half brothers at 16 and 18. And then she escaped from Cuba from the revolution and came to the United States and married my dad here. But you don't meet a lot of people whose mother got married at 14, so we have something in common there. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool having a mother that young. When we first met 12 years ago,
Right.
we were both relatively young, and she's only 15 years older than me. I wasn't even 40 years old yet. So the first place we went together. Out of town, and we went to check into a hotel room. They wanted to know if we were husband and wife, and
Wow.
it's like, no, it's mother. That's creepy, So, but anyway, so she's in the hospital in a secure ward, and my father posts $5,000 bond, which is a lot of money in 1962.
Oh yeah.
And that night, sometime after midnight.
Where did he get that money from? Wait a minute. How did he get so much money?
From what his best friend told me, that the book trade business back then was very lucrative. He would buy these documents that were worthless to the Mexican government and the Mexican people for pennies on the pound, and he would sell them in San Francisco by the inch and make a fortune.
Okay.
So it's very lucrative. When they got together, he had a lot of money. And so he posted his bond and dressed up as a doctor, walked into the isolation ward and walked out with his patient. And they would never be seen from or heard from again. That was the night of August 31st, 1962. And they wouldn't be heard from again until April 19th, 1963.
And what was that?
So when they took off again, this time, of course, the the authorities thought they were going back to Mexico. So they placed extra guards on the Mexican border, and a national all points, a national pickup, as they called it back in the day, were put out on them, and they traveled across the country, some hitchhiking, and because he wrecked the rental car, I guess he was so tired after discharging my mother and driving 200 miles south, I think, from where he discharged her. They found the rental car abandoned, wrecked, unable to start or operate, and blood in the car. So my mother says they just hitchhiked the rest of the time, and that's many months.
Where'd the blood come from?
She does not recall who was injured, but I'm thinking it was my father, because he fell asleep at the wheel. She says she woke up and the car's flying through the air, and her scream woke him up. So I'm guessing he hit his face on the dashboard, maybe, or on the steering wheel.
Okay.
So they remain elusive, staying eventually with relatives in Meridian, Mississippi, for a couple of weeks, and ultimately ending up in the French Quarter of New Orleans in late December of 1962. And they were writing. He was writing hot checks along the way to fund their flight. And on February 12th, 1963, my mother gave birth to me at Southern Baptist Hospital in New Orleans. And my father, because he would be very easily identified and tracked down, chose not to get a job. He likely played local gigs because he was an accomplished keyboard player. He probably did the music scene, but he got my mother a job at an old saloon, the old Ship Ahoy Saloon. She didn't have ID, but she looked old enough to be working behind the bar, so he got her a job there. And when she would come home from her shift, she would find me in the Foot Locker, the trunk that doubled as my crib, but with the lid closed. And she said when she confronted my father, he got angry, threatening. She knew what he was capable of. He said he got tired of hearing it cry. And she's also told me that he was just very jealous of her time with me. So she wasn't allowed to bond with me, I don't think, for whatever reason. So as soon as he got the opportunity, he was going to get rid of the kid. And at 30 days old, on March 15th, 1963, he boarded the old passenger rail train from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. That ride was about an hour back in 1963, and he walked 7 blocks up the main street in Baton Rouge, past the old governor's mansion. Jimmy Davis still in the mansion at the time, and found a spot, I guess, that looked inviting. He walked in, and what turned out to be an 8-plex apartment building back then, and saw that nobody was there. And he wrapped me up in a blanket, stuck a pacifier in my mouth, and laid me down on the stairwell landing and walked away and never looked back. So I made headlines. They were making headlines in San Francisco. San Francisco Chronicle reporter picked up on it and called them the ice cream romance, because they met at Herbert Sherbet's shop. And now an abandoned baby was making headlines in Baton Rouge because nobody had a clue who the parents were. And they looked all over Baton Rouge to try to find the parents. But my father was clever enough to go to next closest largest city to get rid of the evidence.
Incredible. Okay, and let's just underscore one more time that this biological father, when you were an infant, weeks old, would put you in a footlocker, and when you cried, would close the lid on you.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Incredible. Okay, we're going to have to take a little break here and read some commercials if you guys want to get up and get a drink or something like that. But let me ask you real quick. Susan, what did you think when you heard this story? So far, what I'm hearing so far, what was your reaction when you heard this stuff?
When I actually read partial manuscript that Gary had compiled, which was like 500 pages, and I got to that part of it, I was, for a writer, that's just an incredible story. That
Right.
in itself is a great story. So I was just drawn into it immediately because of all of this backstory that had nothing to do with the Zodiac killer.
I hear you, I know what you're saying. It's a great story for us to hear and talk about, but poor Gary had to live it. You know what I mean?
I know.
But it seems like it turned out great, man, Gary. So let me read some ads real fast, and we'll get back. Make some money here. You guys take a break, get a drink, whatever you want to do. Okay, our sponsors. Tonight's show is brought to you, remember, by Audible.com. If you want a free audio book, you go to audibletrial.com, Opperman Report. You sign up for free. Okay, and then we got Pacific West Bamboo, 503-839-8126. Everybody by now knows Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo. She's a great supporter of the show. They're getting ready in a new line of bamboo flooring, veneers, laminates made from Guadawa bamboo, one of the world's strongest bamboo. It's grown and produced and manufactured in Central America using only economically and environmentally friendly practices and standards. You can reach her at demroots@oppermail.com. They can and do ship nationwide. They've been servicing the Northwest for over 10 years, and you can call them up at 503-839-8126. She got a Facebook page, too, Pacific West Bamboo. Good old Mike Gray. Mike Gray's going to be calling in later on tonight. He's the owner and operator of InfinityHomePlans.com. Check out Infinity Home Plans and Design Services, your resource for 3D and 2D draftsman services. They offer a multitude of products, including stock home plans, 2D digital drawing sets, 3D models, renderings, and more. Any kind of design project you got going on, get a hold of Mike Gray. Now, my daughter Victoria has a show, Teen Truth, on CJ Mars Radio, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Pacific Standard Time. She got some big shows coming up. In fact, she's got Amanda is going to be a guest on the show coming up. Okay, emailrevealer.com. Everybody knows emailrevealer.com. That's my website. Now, what if you need to collect child support? Okay? You can go to my website, emailrevealer.com. We have a current place of employment locate, okay? I can help you locate where that deadbeat parent is working and can help you collect your child support, okay? Let's say you got an adoption case. You want to find your adopted parents. You want to find your adopted kid. Give me a call. We can work that out. I can help you on that. I've done a bunch of adoption cases. It's not as tough as you think. If you want to advertise here or promote your website or business, OppermanReport@gmail.com. We're always looking for advertisers. And don't forget the New World Mexican Women. We love these women. They're in Mexico, and they wrote this book called New World Mexican Women. It's available on Lulu.com. It's about their love for their men that have traveled to the United States and their love letters. First, it's written in Spanish and handwritten in Spanish, then with pictures of the women, the beautiful women too, and their loved ones. And then the second half of the book, it's a coffee table book. The second half of the book is how to make authentic Mexican jewelry. And also, too, these New World Mexican women, it's a collective down there. So they're down there, they make their living, they support this town down there by making jewelry. So contact them through their website or contact me. I'll get you in touch with them. And they can cut you a deal on wholesale deal on Mexican jewelry, authentic Mexican jewelry. You can cut a deal with them, import it to the United States, and make a fortune. Now, if you're looking for essential oils, stop by and check out Essentially Tammy on Facebook. She is a young, living essential oils independent distributor. Now, these 100% therapeutic grade oils help support the body's natural functions. You can click on her website, posted on Essentially Tammy, to see the current deals and check out the benefits of oils such as frankincense, joy, valor, lemon, thieves, Panaway, and many more. Email Jocotami, Jocatami, at Yahoo, or call 352-239-8800. 8546 for more information. That's Essentially Tammy on Facebook. And we're here tonight. We got two incredible guests. We got good old Gary L. Stewart, author of the book, The Most Dangerous Animal of All, Searching for My Father and Finding the Zodiac. And we got with us his co-author on this book, Susan Mustafa, who's also written Bloodbath. She's written a book called I've Been Watching You, The South Louisiana Serial Killer, and she wrote a book called Dismembered. And we were talking about, we left off when they left Gary in front of, now what was it, the governor's mansion or something they left you in front of, Gary?
Well, actually, just in the next block, that street's called North Boulevard. It's got lots of governmental buildings on it. It starts with the old Gothic state capitol that's, I guess Louisiana is one of the few states that has two very unique and non-typical state capitol buildings. The first one, it truly looks like a castle. It was pre-Civil War. It was burned and occupied by the Union soldiers in the Civil War and all this great history. Huey Long came around in 1928, I believe, decided he wanted to place his own mark in Louisiana architecture. So he built this 900-foot tall, 34-story needle for a state capitol. So that area of Baton Rouge is the old historic district called Beauregard Town. And yes, the old governor's mansion, which was built to look like the White House, was right next door. And Jimmy Davis, Louisiana's singing governor, you are famous for "You Are My Sunshine,"
Right.
Was actually there. Likely that morning when my father walked right across his front lawn to get to the apartment building next door.
Okay, there's a question in chat. It's going back a bit. It's about the bookstore, the rare bookstore in San Francisco, right? And their curiosity is about the name of the store. Do you remember?
There is a store on the same side of the street on Judah. Get my directions straight. Just to the west. It's a small store, and Susan and I walked in to visit with the guy, and we were telling him my story. And I said, this ice cream parlor, well, it's Donut World now, right? It's a donut shop. The Herbert Sherbert shop is Donut World now. But we were telling the story, and the book would be coming out in a year or so, and he says, "Oh, I know why your father met your mother there, because there was a rare bookstore right across the street at one time." We tried to I got online to find out. I've asked all the old bookstore dealers in San Francisco if they remember, and none of them do. Right now it's a dry cleaners. But I'm sorry, I don't have that answer.
Okay. Well, do you think that, because they're asking if they think that maybe if it was like an occult type bookstore, if there was an occult connection to this, and if your father, your biological father, had ever traded in magical grimoires or something. Are you familiar with that kind of stuff?
Not familiar. Of course, ran across that type thing while researching information on the book and my father. Yes, but I don't know. I would just be speculating if I said that at this point.
Sure, because it seems like an interesting line of work. It's going to Mexico, coming back with these documents and his antiquities and stuff. Okay, so where did we leave off? We left off with you left at the doorstep there, right?
So the Baton Rouge police began a search that would eventually take them over a month to solve. They had no idea they were dealing with an infant from New Orleans. So They placed me in foster care for that time, and the juvenile division of the Baton Rouge Police Department set out to do the best they could do. And for the next week, they followed every lead. They went to every hospital, checked footprints, and sure enough, no babies matching my footprints were born at the two hospitals that were here in Baton Rouge at the time. They did not think to call New Orleans. So my father goes home, back to his home with my mother. At one point the next day, I think my mother became hysterical when he actually returned home without me. She originally told me that she left him immediately when he came home. That's not true. But I believe she put up a good fight, because the next day he actually called the lady who lived in the apartment just above the stairwell landing where he had left me. You see, they had names on the mailboxes back then on the outside of the building, and I think he knew. He placed me by stairwell landing to apartment number 8, and that belonged to Miss Mary S. Bonnet. He called her the next day from a payphone and said, "Look, the mother of the child is destitute. We're going to come back today and get the baby." And she said, Miss Bonnet told him, she asked him, "Are you the father of the baby?" He said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Well, I don't have the baby. The police have the baby." And she said the next thing she hears is an operator saying, "Please place more change in the phone to continue the call." And that was it. The phone went dead. So she knew he was calling from out of town. So she called the police again and told him, "Hey, I think the baby's father just called from out of town," because I heard the operator come on. So anyway, of course, they did not show up to claim their child. And from what I understand, the next month was a very rocky relationship between my mother and father. He put her in an environment, the old Ship Ahoy Saloon that he got her employment with happened to be one of the roughest bars. It was a sailor's bar. New Orleans, Port of Call, lots of sailors in and out of New Orleans. And the end of the night were brawls and bloodied fingers and bloodied noses. Well, she happened to meet someone there, and a traveling businessman from Seattle or somewhere working for Boeing, and he convinced her that if she had a relationship with him, that he would make sure that she would get her baby back. So I think Mom decided to run off with this guy, and that was the end of it. She left him. She left my father, took his money, his clothes, everything. So that afternoon, he called the police and told her, "Hey, you're looking for a fugitive you're looking for a runaway juvenile from San Francisco. I can tell you where to find her." So the New Orleans Police Department staked out her new location with this new married man.
Wait, so that was your father who called up the cops and tipped them off where your mother was?
Yes.
And then later on, the Zodiac is making phone calls to the cops, too?
Absolutely.
Yeah, kind of interesting, yeah. By the way, Susan, don't be shy, okay? If you want to chime in and help me co-host the show and ask questions, and stuff like that, because you're way more familiar with the story than I am. So just don't be shy, okay?
Well, I'm just letting Gary tell it. It's his story, and
okay.
He'll do a much better job.
Okay. Well, just if you think my questions are going off.
Jump in there anytime, Susan, because we do make a much better team when we're together. So yeah. Anyway, so she tries to start a new life with or has dreams set on this engineer from Boeing, and my father turns her in. So they do. 2:00 in the morning, walking home from the Ship Ahoy Saloon, arm in arm with her man. They arrest her. Two New Orleans policemen arrest her and take her into custody. They let him go. And she immediately starts singing the blues, and told him, well, the cops, why are you arresting me? You should be arresting my boyfriend, my former husband. After all, he abandoned my baby in Baton Rouge. And so, the lights go off. Someone thinks to call Baton Rouge and see if there's a abandoned baby case. Well, yes, in fact, there is. They put two and two together. The chief over the juvenile division over my case at that point drove to New Orleans to interrogate my mother, and took custody of her, brought her to Baton Rouge, where the authorities telephoned her mother, my grandmother, and said, all right, your daughter's had a baby. Do you want the child, or do you want your daughter to sign relinquishment papers? Well, Grandma had just had another child herself. 6 months earlier, her and her husband, Vic Kalitsian, had a baby boy. So now she's thinking, okay, I've got two juvenile girls, I've got a 6-month-old son, and now I'm going to have a 1-month-old and 2-month-old infant. Can't do it. So Grandma told Mom, go ahead and sign the papers. She signed the papers. They gave her 10 minutes alone in one of the governmental building rooms with me. Last time she would see me for 39 years. And they then extradited her to San Francisco, where terms for her return to her mother were, number one, that she relinquished the baby, but number two, that she go to the Southern California Correctional Home for Wayward Girls in Camarillo for a minimum of 6 months to, I guess, to 2 years. And then my father was extradited back to San Francisco as a fugitive from justice.
How much time did he get for all of this?
They had a name so I was able to be placed for adoption, which I was exactly 1 month after the April apprehension of my parents.
How much time did your father get for doing all this?
Well, what happened? The original charges for abandoning me were somehow levied upon my mother as well. And I don't quite understand that, because the records are the records are all in the juvenile division in Baton Rouge. But it's called criminal neglect of family, which is a felony. Somehow along the way, those charges got dropped, but my father went back and served. He received a jail sentence for a term of 1 year in the county jail there at the Hall of Justice in San Francisco for the statutory rape of my mother, enticing a minor from home, which is the shimmying out juvenile hall, and the third count was child stealing. When he dressed up like a doctor, discharged Mom out of the hospital. So those three charges were the original. He even though Senator Strom Thurmond actually went to bat for him, because he was originally from, his father was from South Carolina, begging the judge for leniency. He got a year. And they also sent him to Atascadero State Hospital, which is an all-male forensic mental hospital for the sexually deviant and criminally insane. That's being changed now. Atascadero is, I don't know if they're closing the place or what, but they're down to a minimal amount of inmates and patients. But back then he was sentenced there for 90 days. And then, so by the time he gets out of that 90 days, all the other jurisdictions on his flight from justice start piling up charges, including the U.S. Marshals for wire fraud, writing bad checks, and so that ultimately got him a 3-year sentence to San Quentin.
So, wait a second. So he got more time for the bad checks.
Yeah. Believe that?
No, I do believe it. I do believe it. So, but the max he served was 3 years.
He was sentenced to 3 years. He actually, I think it's 20 months that
Oh,
he
wow.
was actually in San Quentin.
Wow. And you think now his family knew Strom Thurmond? How did he get a hold of Strom Thurmond?
My father's father was quite the polar opposite of my father. His father was a very loved and appreciated minister and military man. He joined he was a missionary to Japan in 1936 when my father, or 35 when my father was a year old. They were missionaries on the mission field for the United Methodist Conference before World War II, and only left because Japan bombed the United States there in Pearl Harbor. They came home. Grandpa went to chaplain school and joined the Navy and went back to sea in the Pacific Theater for Admiral Bull Halsey, and was in his third fleet as the chaplain on his escort carrier, the USS Altamaha. He became quite the popular Veterans of Foreign Wars ambassador. He served as the national chaplain for the. In fact, he died in office as the national chaplain for Veterans of Foreign War, and it was his second term. And he was friends with President Kennedy. He was friends with Ronald Reagan. He was friends with, I guess, all the presidents, post Eisenhower, because of his role as a spiritual and military leader. He taught business and finance and intelligence at Fort Benjamin Harrison.
Okay, let me interrupt you for 1 second. I want you to continue, but 1 second, because now if this is true, and your father was the Zodiac killer, that would mean that his father was friends with, you said, President Reagan and who else? All these people?
Yes.
And now, how was their relationship? How was the relationship between your father and your grandfather?
Very, very difficult. They were estranged. Most of my father's. After my father flew my mother back to Chicago to try to get his dad to remarry him to this juvenile, my grandfather became highly upset. And like my father was surprised at that. I mean, really, come on. He said, "Take her home, Van. She's a baby." I think that's when it started, and it never got any better. I heard one story where they had one visit with the Austrian half siblings of mine, and it didn't go so well, and they never spoke again. I've got letters from my grandfather to his sisters back in South Carolina that they so lovingly shared and gave all those to me, where he talks about, I think Van's trying to live a good life now. He's stopped drinking for a bit, but that only lasted for a moment because, my father went down the tubes due to his alcoholism, and he and his father died estranged. My father did not attend his father's funeral.
Okay, but just to clarify that, but your grandfather got a hold of Strom Thurmond to make this plea for your father. Now, was that after this big estrangement or before the big estrangement? Because I'm losing track. Now, you said that when he went back to try and get married again, have your father perform the ceremony. My
bad for jumping around right there. There was no estrangement prior to my father's elopement and relationship with my mother. My father had married before, and that marriage ended badly with his first wife, filing for divorce on the grounds of inhuman treatment and extreme cruelty. So Grandpa probably wasn't happy about that one either, but they weren't estranged. He still had hopes of his son becoming a successful, happy human being. My grandfather did not remarry my parents. He refused. And so yes, being quite the celebrity my grandfather was, he petitioned governor, I guess back then, no, it was Senator Strom Thurmond, to please write a letter to the judge in my father's case on his behalf, asking for leniency, and Strom Thurmond did.
Okay. So do you think it's possible, okay, that even if they were estranged during the time of the investigation of the Zodiac killings, that your grandfather still would have reached out and tried to help him out and keep things quiet and keep him off the list of suspects?
You know, I don't know. That's a good question, Ed. I mean, I know for a fact that my grandfather, when he found out that my father and my mother, even as illicit and as illegal this flight of theirs was, because she was underage and he was wanted for statutory rape, his father, the minister, called his brothers and sisters and said, look, if Van shows up with the girl, you help them all you can.
See?
I will pay you back. So thinking that the good minister would probably maybe say, do the right thing, turn him in, it's still family. And I guess, that's a tough one.
All right, we're coming up to a break here, and we're gonna have a nice little. Oh yeah, okay. Well, let's do it now. Cindy says we can do it right now. So we're at the hour. We're gonna have a nice little break. Okay, nice little musical break. We're on 3-4 minutes. You guys want to take a drink or whatever? And we're here tonight with Gary L. Stewart, who is and Susan D. Mustafa. They're the co-authors of The Most Dangerous Animal of All: Searching for My Father and Finding the Zodiac Killer. Okay, and you can find a link to that book up on Amazon. You can find the link on the Opperman Report blog. You can go there and click on this. I think this is a really fascinating story, and I listened to all the other interviews that I could find on YouTube, and I'm learning great new stuff as we talk tonight. So thank you very much, Gary. We'll be back with at least another hour of this. So Cindy, take us away with some nice music. Welcome back to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. And don't forget, this show is brought to you by Audible.com. You go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report, and you sign up for free. You can get a free audio book that I mentioned free, and it helps support the show because we get a commission from that, okay? Tonight we have with us Gary L. Stewart and Susan D. Mustafa, the author of the book The Most Dangerous Animal of All: Searching for My Father and Finding the Zodiac Killer. Gary, are you back?
I am back.
Okay, great. Oh, my God. Okay, so now we were kind of dancing around with the theory that possibly your grandfather had some political connections to help keep your father out of trouble in this.
Yeah, I would love to have met my grandfather.
Yeah.
The story is when he found out that his son had abandoned his grandson, which my grandfather only had one son, and that was my father. My grandfather told his family the rest of his life, the one biggest mistake he ever made in his life was allowing his wife to have custody of his son after the divorce. So it was a big regret. And my grandfather came to Baton Rouge literally to try to adopt me and get me out of foster care. But thank God it worked out the way it did, because I've got the most beautiful family in the world. And but I think my grandfather lived his life with a whole lot of regrets on what had happened between or with his son. And In fact, recently I happened to find, and it's not in the book, and it probably should have been. I happened to find my grandfather's pastor, who actually did his funeral service in Indianapolis or Noblesville, Indiana, where he died, where he last lived. Before they shipped my grandfather's remains to Arlington to be buried there. And this man was so generous, wonderful, wonderful minister. He actually had some audio recordings of my grandfather because I always wanted to hear my father's voice, right? You imagine you want to see a picture. So I've got a picture. You know he's dead. You know you never hear him. So before I knew anything about the Zodiac killer, I wanted to hear my father's voice. And I know now that that's when I found that little audio clip that's all over the web now of him in front of the judge. I was devastated when Tom Spix from KPIX said that there's no audio. I was devastated. But one step better than that was getting 4 of my grandfather's sermons that he had preached as an older man in retirement, and getting to hear his voice, because I always heard he spoke with such elegance and just such a beautiful speaker, and he was. And so I also got to attend his funeral posthumously, thanks to Dr. John Landon there in Noblesville. He sent me the recording of my grandfather's funeral, the music and the preaching. But just yesterday, I got another DVD from him. He said, "Gary, I thought you might want to hear this. This is when your grandfather was much healthier." It was 1979, so just 5 years before he died. And his voice was stronger, but he was giving his testimony from his pew in church. And he mentioned he had some regrets. He had some serious regrets. And I just would love to know the details of all of those regrets.
Now, you said that your grandfather he made a plea in front of the court. It's a video that's on YouTube.
If you just Google Earl Van Best in court, my father, the day he dressed up as a doctor,
right?
This is that video, that silent video, 17 seconds long, is him entering his plea before the judge and agreeing to return. That's August 31st. He promises the judge he will be back in court on September 5th. 5 days later, he jumps bail that night.
And that's also the night that he dressed up as a doctor and helped Judy escape from the hospital, yep. Which says a lot about his total lack of respect for any type of authority. Most people wouldn't get out of a courtroom, post and bond and going through an indictment and then go do the same thing again that they were in court for.
You can see in his eyes too, Susan, as he's looking at the judge, like it's just like the most soulless lack of respect for anybody when you look at his nonchalant shrugging of the eyes. Is just
yep.
Yeah, incredible, man. And that's the kind of guy that could pull off the Zodiac murders and taunt the police, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right, man. So what happens next?
So, let's see. We were talking about their estrangement. So my grandfather knew that my father was spiraling down the road of alcoholism. His I think at that point he knew his life was ruined. He was never going to make a success of anything anymore. I think the document business that he was in was not as lucrative as before, or maybe his buyers just didn't want to have anything to do with this guy, man. I mean, right? He's been in San Quentin for 2 years. So there was it's sad. I read the letter of my grandfather's second wife to the family after that basically announced to the family that Van was dead, that my father was dead. And she said, I looked around at Van's funeral and I mean at at Earl, my grandfather's funeral, and there was no van. He didn't care enough to go. And certainly he knew it was national news. So, but anyway, they had no relationship, and I just don't know how much contact they had at all in the 70s before they died.
Okay, so what happens next?
So, I in my journey, I find all this stuff out. That's all fine and good, but I try to establish a relationship. I find out that after my father got out of San Quentin, he married again to a lady originally from Austria. And, my father was fluent in German. He was fluent in many languages. His father was fluent in 7 languages, I believe, according to his military record. So he married this lady. She's a social worker. I get that from their marriage license, but I don't know if maybe she was a social worker that he had contact with because of his coming out of the prison system, halfway house, whatever. I do know that they married just a few months after he got out of prison. And they had a baby. That was 1966. Their firstborn was in 67. So I have an older half brother named Oliver Van Best. Interesting. Shows you the narcissism and the arrogance of this man who was my father. He had the whole family take on his name. And I'm not just talking about the best name. His wife, Edith Koss, Kos, became Edith Van Best. 3 words. Oliver was Oliver Van Best. And in 68, the second boy came along, my half brother, Urban Van Best. And when the daughter was born, she was born in Austria and estranged from my father. But her mother gave her the name Guinevere Van Best. So that family situation falls apart. And so when I find out that my father's dead, that my grandfather's dead, but I have half siblings in Austria, well, the first thing I try to do is go after the silver lining. I'm going to meet these people in Austria. I want to see if they've got I didn't know that they were estranged from my father. I thought, I just thought that they grew up in his household. So surely they've got a picture or two of the family around a Christmas tree, right? I just want to see what my father looked like in his 50s and 60s. I didn't know how old he was at that time when he died. So I contacted my sister, and we spoke on the phone, and I stuck my foot in my mouth by saying, she happens to be a judge on the Federal Asylum Review Board in Vienna, Austria. And I asked her the question. I said, "Are you working for the Asylum Board to help people like our father?" And she says, "What do you mean to help people like our father?" I said, "Well, criminals." She said, "My father was no criminal, and I just chose to go to university to become an attorney. It has nothing to do with my father." So I realized this is going to be difficult. So she told her mother, "Hey, this guy from Louisiana is telling me
he's a troublemaker."
Yeah, troublemaker. Well, I said, okay. So I sent newspaper articles. I sent police reports. I sent the adoption papers that I did have, and said, "Okay, Guinevere, are you trying to tell me I'm making this stuff up?" So her mother got involved and said, "You've got your information wrong, Mr. Stewart. And by the way, you're not the first one over the years who want to be a member of the Best family." And I'm thinking, really?
Wow.
No, really. Susan's seen the letter. So please, if my children are missing some small fact about their father, they can get that information from me. So please stop terrorizing my children and bothering me. Have a nice life. And so I realized I made some mistakes in my approach to my sister, but I did have some inaccurate information. So I went back to my mother and I said, because my mother had helped me locate the information on my father. You see, so let's fast forward 39 years. My mother contacts my parents. I decide to meet my mother. I call my mother for the very first time on what would have been our 39th Mother's Day together. And I leave her a voice message saying, hey, this is Gary Stewart. This call is for Jude Guilford. If you are my mother, I'd like to wish you happy Mother's Day for the first time. She called me back that evening, and 3 weeks later, I was meeting her face to face. I asked her who my father was. She told me a story about taking me by train to Baton Rouge and turning me into the authorities at a church, not abandoning me,
Right.
but still that taking me from her arms, from her screaming, crying arms, made me first say, I don't want to find out about this guy. But 6 months later, the curiosity got the best of me, and I asked her to help me find my father. The first person she called was the chief of police of the San Francisco Police Department, who, and for me, no big deal, because that's the first place to go for a missing person or a private investigator like yourself. But I knew that my mother had married 11 years after her life with me and my father. She married the first ever African-American homicide inspector in the history of the San Francisco Police Department. Why she waited for him to pass away before she came looking for me is another subject and another topic of debate. He was deceased. She found me. I asked for help. She went to his coworkers and good friends of hers, his fraternity brothers on the department.
How long after he died did she come looking for you?
He died in 98, and she located me in 2002.
Okay.
And she said, and I saw some letters that she wrote as part of her search. It took her 2 years to find me. So
How did she find you? She used the cop friends to find you?
no,
Oh, no, you told me, yeah, but the book of stamps.
yeah, but she joined a search finders group.
Right.
Who recommended she register with the National Voluntary Registry, which means if an adoptive parent registers and the relinquished child registers, this National Voluntary Registry will put you in touch with each other.
Right.
Mom registered, I didn't, right? Remember, I'm still thinking I'm not going to hurt Lloyd and Leona's feelings.
Right.
So this registry, somebody recommended that she contact Vital Records and see if she can't pay somebody off to get in the file. So, and that's what happened. But to find my father, because we don't know if he's dead or alive. And one of the reasons I wanted to find him, the main reason is because, look at my life. I've got a great life. I'm happy. I went to college. I graduated. Everything's good. I wanted to show my father, it's okay that you took me from my mother and didn't raise me. The parents who raised me did okay. And I'm happy. And I want you to, surely you must have carried some sort of guilt around with you for the past 40 years. I want you to let that guilt go. I want you to be at peace, knowing you can look me in the eye and say, I'm okay. So she enlisted help of first the chief of police, Earl Sanders, who, just right as we were doing this, he was indicted. Charges were brought against him for obstruction of justice in covering up the famous 2002 Fajita-Gate scandal, where two cops, I don't know, stole some bag lunches from somebody or something. Anyway, that's an old story, but and Sanders was ultimately cleared of those charges. They never convicted him.
Well, you can't lift Prince off a fajita.
Well, you'll be surprised. It's California that it was literally a loophole that allowed him to get off. So anyway, he says, "Look, I think I'm having heart trouble and chest pains with all this stress going on, and I'm on administrative leave, so I'm not at the office. Will you call Harold Butler? See, Earl Prentice Sanders and Rotea Guilford were best buddies. They led the charge for equal rights amongst the San Francisco Police Department, and they were successful. And Rotea Guilford, my mother's second husband, deceased husband, was always thought to be the one who was going to be the first ever African American police chief in the history of the San Francisco Police Department. He died before he got the shot, and Earl Sanders got that shot in 2002. So they were close, and they picked up a young man in their group along the way called Harold Butler Jr. And Harold was Rotea was Harold's mentor. Rotea Guilford, my mother's former husband, said, I will show you how to do it right in this police department. I will train you. I will teach you. And so at the time, Harold Butler, now a sergeant in the Internal Affairs Department, he can probably do a pretty good job locating a missing person. So Mom went to Harold. 6 months later, Harold came back with information, said, hey, I found his file. His name was Earl Van Best Jr. He was born in Wilmore, Kentucky. That's because my grandfather was in missionary in the seminary there at Asbury Theological Seminary right before going to Japan as a missionary. He was about to graduate. He graduated in 35. My father was born in 34. Gave me a name, social security number, date of birth, place of birth, and mother's maiden name, and suggested that I use Roots Web. Ancestry.com, I don't think was even, if it was around, it wasn't popular. Roots Web and the Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church, was the place to go to get your research. So I didn't care, and I had that.
Wait, Gary, I'm sorry. What year was that?
This was 2003.
Oh my God! You had a social security number. You could have found them in 2 seconds. There's all kind of websites. 1-800-US. Search my website. You can find them. I can find them for you in 15 minutes. Yeah.
Well, it wouldn't have been quite the dramatic story then.
Oh yeah, I know. This story. I'd be home having a beer right now. This story would be over, bro.
You could have solved the Zodiac case, Ed.
Well, okay. I don't know about that. We're working on it.
I do tell people that this was, Ed, for me. Okay. Anyway, not the most. I am an electrical engineer, but
right.
Laptops weren't around when I graduated. So this was in the day of dial-up. So everything, if I had high-speed internet, this book would have come out 6 years ago.
I hear you.
But the research took so long, within 6 months, though, I did find out that he was deceased. My grandfather was deceased. I found out all this information, but I had this conflict with my siblings, and I wanted to meet them. Okay, shouldn't we be able to have a reunion? But the Earl Harold Butler in Internal Affairs, my mother's friend, told her that there are things in my father's file that he was not going to share with me. I didn't care about that at first. But now I realize maybe not knowing this information was causing a divide between me and my sister. And if I just knew that, then maybe I could present that to her and show her, Gary's not making this stuff up. This is straight from the San Francisco Police Department. Please show me what's in my father's file. She called Harold Butler and said, Harold, Gary is so devastated. He's about to lose touch with the only half sibling he's got on his father's side of the family because of bad information. Please, he knows his father's dead. He knows his father is accused of or was convicted and guilty of statutory rape with me, abusing and abandoning him. He knew he left him on a doorstep. What's in that file? We have to know. And Harold Butler told my mother what was in that file was what my father went on to do would make what he did to us seem inconsequential. One last time I went to my mother and I said, Mom, this is not going to cut it. I need to know. I mean, I am, my father's dead. Who is this going to hurt? He went to the chief, the former chief of police of San Francisco Police Department, went and had coffee with him. She called me that afternoon. It was April 4th, 2004. She called me and she said, honey, I just had coffee with Earl. He said, what your father did was so heinous, it would destroy you. Now I'm thinking, what he did, why didn't he serve time for it? Why can't we find anything on this guy? Well, turns out is what he was a suspect in, but they just didn't have the goods on him. So I just dropped it. I literally dropped it. And I said, you know what? I will never have a relationship with my sister. I will never find anything about my father again. And I'm trying to think of heinous. What's more heinous than raping? Although it's, well, I mean, how can it be consensual?
Yeah, 14 years old, yeah.
Years old. Then locking your son. I've got injuries. My mother told me of the abuse, but I suffered a broken nose and a cut on the back of my head before I became a steward. That either happened at the hands of my father or in foster care. What could be more heinous than child abuse, statutory rape, and almost killing your first wife? I'm pretty sure he was. And the other thing too, Susan found out is that the San Francisco Police Department don't hold on to records more than 30 years unless the guy's a suspect in a murder case. They did not know he was dead. I'm the one who found out that my father was dead. I knew so little at the time about his death date. When I called Social Security to report him dead, and I couldn't give him the exact date. I knew what year it was. So the San Francisco Police Department didn't know where he was, or if he was dead or alive. But they said, what he did is so heinous it would destroy you. So I quit looking. I said, forget this, man. I have now, okay, so it's 2002. That was 2004. I have wasted 2 years of my life trying to find this man, to have a cup of coffee with him and tell him I forgive him for what he did to me, throw my arms around him, tell him, look, I love you. Look at your son. I mean, look at your grandson. You've got a grandson. Just like your father, I too only have one child, and he's a boy. He's a son. It's kind of runs in the best genes, I guess. I was done. My story, my journey was over. Until 90 days later, I'm watching an A&E cold case file show on the Zodiac killer. At that point, I knew absolutely nothing about the Zodiac killer. I'd heard of him before. One of my coworkers mentioned that our office in Benicia, California, for the company I went to work for, is right. It's off Lake Herman Road. It literally connects to that fence, that gate. If you walk that dirt road off of Lake Herman Road towards the Benicia pumping station, you will ultimately end up at my office. One of my coworkers said, hey, we had when they hired me, I went out there the first day we go to lunch, and one of my coworkers says, so we're going to have an office in Baton Rouge now, right? I kind of laughed. Yeah. I'm thinking, this is my first day with these guys. I need to think business, not nothing lighthearted. I'm serious. I want to impress these people. And then he makes the comment, he says, well, I thought all you guys had in Louisiana was the West Nile virus and serial killers, because that year we had a rash of early West Nile, and Susan was about to get the beginning stories of her career. And little did I know at the time, I would be swabbed as a suspect in the Louisiana serial killer case as well.
Oh, really? Wait, tell us about that. That runs in the family, huh, bro?
It's not quite his fault.
That's people say, well, man, if my father was a Zodiac killer, I don't think I'd write that book.
Oh, man.
It's just so much more than just the Zodiac story.
Oh, well, yes. Man, you know what? Okay, listen, we're going to drop Hazy Radio at the hour. So why don't we save that part about how you were a suspect yourself there? Okay, let's save that to the next hour, man, to like the after show. See what's going on with that one. And just, all right. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm watching this show, and flashes the wanted sketch from 1969 from San Francisco Police Department. And man, I mean, I'm getting chills now as I retell the story, Ed, because I will never forget that day. I mean, the hair stands up on the back of my neck and my arms, and I get these goosebumps. It's my father. That picture, you see this Harold Butler guy? He
Yeah.
told me, he said, Gary, I'm amazed at how much you look like your father. And the one night, the only night I ever went to dinner with Harold Butler and his family and my mother and my son, he stared at me really weird all night long. He's staring at me, and I got uncomfortable. I elbowed my mother. I said, man, what's wrong with this guy? She said, honey, I just think he's fascinated with how much you look like your father, whatever. So Butler says, after that, he said, I'm gonna send you a picture, an old DMV photo of your father. I said, oh, how cool. How cool is this? So he said, I'm going to email it first, and then I'll mail you an original. So as the email's coming through, back in the day of dial-up, here it is loading slowly on my screen. My 12-year-old son's looking over my shoulder. Up pops this guy with absolutely no life in his eyes whatsoever. And my 12-year-old son, Zach, says, Dad, he looks like a serial killer.
Wow.
And we'll get to that to the after show, why Zach knows what a serial killer looks like, because one of his best friend's mothers was a victim of the Louisiana serial killer. Okay, so this is crazy. So I've got this picture. I thought it was an old driver's license photo. As it turns out, it was a 1962 mugshot from my father's statutory rape of my mother. Zach looks at the TV screen with A&E's wanted sketch on there, San Francisco Police Department, and he said, hey, Dad, it's you. So I go in my office and I get the framed mugshot I have of my father, because I put it on my desk as inspiration for me to keep going, to tolerate these 2 years of hell on earth, just to find this man that I love. I want to tell him that I love him. And turns out it's a mugshot. And oh my God, he looks exactly like the wanted sketch. I read the description of the wanted sketch: 5'8", medium build, wears glasses, brown hair with a tint of red. It's my father's exact description. So I emailed my mother. I emailed Harold Butler that night. I said, now I know what's so heinous. Look, I'll be in San Francisco tomorrow if you will meet with me and tell me the truth. Butler didn't respond to me. He responded to my mother and said, look, tell Gary, oh, no, don't worry about that. We know who the Zodiac killer was. His name was Arthur Lee Allen, and he died 10 years ago. So this case is closed. It's over with. We got DNA and everything. I'm like, really? So I look on dial-up again. I find out that that's not the case at all. The case is closed because it's closed. For whatever reason, they closed it, but it's not solved. And I find this note: it's closed, but if you've got any credible tips, please call Lieutenant John Hennessy at the San Francisco Police Department. I picked up the phone. I said, Lieutenant Hennessy, has the Zodiac case been solved? He laughed and said, no. I said, look, I promise you, I'm not a kook. I'm not a cult thrill seeker, chaser. I don't have a blog. I'm an electrical engineer from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I have a reason to believe that my father was a Zodiac killer. I talked to him for 30 minutes. He asked me to write it down, summarize it in a letter. He called me and said, when are you going to be in San Francisco? I was there in October, and he sat with me again. And when he heard that my mother's second husband was married to my mother, and then that my father was married to my mother, and I thought my father was a Zodiac killer. And oh, by the way, as it turns out, my mother's second husband, Rotea Guilford, he also worked the Zodiac case. Okay. That's when Lieutenant Hennessy said, man, something's up here. There's got to be something to it. So he asked me then for a sample of my DNA. I gave it to him. Some time goes by. He says, look, This is going to take a while. We have a 3-year backlog of current cases. So this could take a while, but I'm going to get it done for you. And I could tell he was sincere. So I mentioned to my mother, I said, hey, I don't have to worry about your friend Butler anymore. I went around Butler. I went to Lieutenant Hennessy, and by the way, he's the head of homicide. And look at this paper, Mom. He swabbed me for my DNA. He believes me. And that's when I realized I might have made a mistake. My mother sent that CSI form to Harold Butler, and I think Harold Butler went in and shut the case down. I don't know if, and we'll get to that later, where we stand today. I don't know if my DNA ever got processed and those 5 markers matched close enough for Harold Butler to bury the case, because they didn't want Rotea for it to become public that one of theirs actually interviewed and cleared my father as a Zodiac suspect, or if Butler just didn't like it at all and just shut it down and canned it. All I know is Lieutenant Hennessy got demoted right out of homicide. He went to special investigations. In a conciliatory prize for that, they named him captain instead of lieutenant. So he gets a bump in command, but I think he was told, you never speak to this guy again, and we won't get you for willful insubordination, because he was not supposed to swab me. The case, he had orders from the mayor, do not spend any more money on this case, and he swabbed me for my DNA. So we wait. He's moved, and here we go. The case is squashed. I call Hennessy. I email Hennessy. For the first time in my life, he doesn't respond. So I said, you know what? I've got to share this story. So I started writing. And like Susan said, it was 500 pages of everything: emotion, journey, newspaper articles, police reports, everything. Then, well, let me back up a second. That file that Harold Butler had, I asked Hennessy the day he swabbed me, I said, please don't tell my mother about this. I mean, please don't tell Harold Butler and my mother about this, because I don't want to upset her. She just doesn't want this whole Zodiac thing to be true. And I'm going to do this on my own. I need to know. I have to have the truth. Lieutenant Hennessy went to Harold Butler's desk, his office, and he asked Butler to see my father's file. Butler told him no. Hennessy called me and said, Gary, you know what? I'm pissed. Butler worked for me. I trained him. He worked for me for 20 years. And now, because he's internal affairs, he won't even let me see the file. So I printed the best I've got. There's a computer file on your father. It's an old FBI type file, and it's got everything that he was ever charged with, and it's got all the disposition of the court in his criminal sentencing. There was nothing in there outside of the things we share in the book. His relationship with my mother, his abandonment of me, his time in San Quentin, wire fraud, and 3 or 4 counts of drunk driving there up to his last days. There was nothing that I didn't know. That there was nothing heinous that I didn't know. Right. So the manual file is on Butler's desk. He refuses to share it with Hennessy, so Hennessy goes around him. That's what happened. I decided I've got to share my story. I've got to write the book. My intent was never to betray Lieutenant Hennessy's trust in me. My intent was to get to the truth. I didn't have to write a book. If Lieutenant Hennessy came back and said, Gary, your markers match, chances are we're going to close and so we're going to solve this case. You don't need a book. They're just going to go straight to the press and it's over. The victims' families have closure. I've got the experience and the other wonderful things that have come out of my story and my journey. most part being the love and acceptance and unconditional forgiveness in the Stewart home, the way I was raised, and all those things associated with that, have my story. So that opportunity wasn't there. They shut my case down. So fortunately, God placed Susan Mustafa in my path. She took my mess and helped make it into something that was no small task at all, something that made sense and something that was easy to understand, because this story goes all the way to the Civil War. It's deep, and she did a great job. Next thing you know, we've got a New York Times bestseller. We're featured on the cover of People magazine the next day, and now people have asked what happened. Since the book came out, the San Francisco.
Before we get to that, though, because we only got about 15 minutes left live on with the two stations, can you lay out the evidence? What you think? What's convinced you? Besides the so far, you only told us about the picture, the mugshot.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I had absolutely nothing else, I would know for certain that my father is a Zodiac killer for one thing alone, and that is his name in the ciphers. When Zodiac wrote a 3-part cipher, mailed them to 3 different Bay Area newspapers, the Examiner, the Chronicle, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, he buried an encryptic message, a hidden message in those symbols and letters. That message says something like, part of it says, I like killing man because it's more fun than killing wild animals in the forest. After all, man is the most dangerous animal of all, which is part of where the book title came from. But once he saw that these high school teachers cracked that code, he also told them in his first letters, and in his letters is the Zodiac that coincide with his arrest dates and making the newspapers with my mother, by the way. By the way, if you crack this cipher, you'll have my identity. Meaning, not only is there a hidden message, but my name's in that file, y'all. Sorry, being from Louisiana. My father's name appears in all of those ciphers, just the way he wrote it, perfectly. Pops out like a word search puzzle. E.V. Best Jr., the same way he signed his name on his booking sheet with my mother. There's also another, according to the Zodiac aficionados out there and the bloggers and the amateur sleuths, there's this one super duper unsolvable, uncrackable code called the 340, because I guess it's got 340 characters. Well, I never looked at it. Okay. I didn't bother, but our agent did. When he saw my father's name in the first code, he said, well, let me see if I can find his name here. And he starts with this B right in the center of the puzzle, not in the center, a little bit to the right. It's a backward B in right in the center of the puzzle. And so he looks for Best, B-E-S-T, and he finds it going backwards. And then he finds Earl Van Best Jr. spelled out all the way. 17 perfect characters. There are people out there that will tell you, oh, I can make anybody's name fit in those ciphers. No, you can't. No, you can't. 17 letters, perfectly spelled out perfectly, and then EV Best. And then once nobody cracked that 340, even the CIA, Secret Service, Disco, nobody could crack that code. He sent one more letter. And he said, by the way, have you cracked that code yet? Emphasizing in parentheses, my name is, and then he gave 13 meaningless symbols. EARLVANBESTJR, Earl Van Best Jr. Author Lee Allen doesn't fit in those 3 separate ciphers. No other suspect they've ever had fits perfectly. You don't have to add a word, substitute a word, leave out a letter, like some of these guys try to do to make it convenient. my father's name fits perfectly. The fact that the newspaper reporter who blasted my father in the Chronicle for his illicit romance, he found love in an ice cream parlor. The only problem is he's 27 and she's 14. The Zodiac targeted Paul Avery, that reporter who made fun of my parents and my father's relationship with my mother. Man with child bride arrested. He blasted him all over the newspapers.
Well, that was
So,
a character that played by Robert Downey Jr., right?
yes, indeed. He did a great job with that. He came back and he picked on Avery. If Avery were alive today, I have a real strong sense that he would say, guys, look no further. Gary's done it. Because he targeted Avery and he targeted the newspapers. He made those guys put this on the front page. You know, everything else. The Japanese connection to the Mikado, the British connection, so many things, significant dates of Zodiac events that correspond directly to his failed, doomed relationship with my mother.
Did your father have a connection to Arthur Lee Allen?
The connection. Arthur Lee Allen insisted to the last day he was interviewed, I am not the Zodiac. He said that he knew who the Zodiac killer was. He was some crazy guy he met in Atascadero State Hospital.
And that's where your father was?
Yes. Arthur Lee Allen was an intern. First, Arthur Lee Allen was an intern at Atascadero, right? Part of going through his getting his education. Years later, he would be a prisoner at Atascadero because he was, I don't know, he's child molestation charges or something as a high school teacher, I think.
What did your father do for a living after the book stuff? The rest of his life.
I really believe, because he called a friend of mine, his best friend's wife, and dropped by to visit her. I think all he did after that was try to continue in the antiquities trade. He was always going to Mexico, making those trips back, trying to find something of value. Early in the late 70s, there are some documents you can find online where he actually sold a King Philip or some kind of first governor to Spain's on there. Quite a handsome price tag on that one that he actually, I think he bought it on a trip to Austria and sold it. It's all recorded online. So he continued in that. I don't think he ever really had a normal, what I would consider a normal job. He wasn't employed by anybody, as far as I know.
Oh, okay. So no, we have the ciphers, right? And then we have the mugshot. Then
Yes.
we have a connection to Arthur Lee Allen. What else
Yes.
do you have?
We've got handwriting. We've got fingerprints. You can try real hard to find fingerprints online in the Zodiac case. And all the jurisdictions, Riverside County, Solano County, and San Francisco County, San Francisco Police Department, all claim to have fingerprints from the Zodiac killer, yet I don't think any of them have bothered to get together and see if any of them match. But I know there's one set of prints online you can get, and those were from the cab driver murder, Paul Stein, in San Francisco. That's the only case in San Francisco's jurisdiction. That's the only one the SFPD is worried about. There's a fingerprint with a very noticeable scar on the right index finger. My father, on his booking sheet that Lieutenant Hennessy gave me, has the same scar on his right index finger.
Okay, so we got the finger. And what about the handwriting? What do you have with that?
I had, when Lieutenant Hennessy asked me, first thing he asked me for years ago was handwriting, and I didn't think I had any. I didn't realize I had any because they were in the form of marriage license, marriage certificates, and whatever else I had on my father at the time. I think I only had 4 exemplars. He asked me, so I said, no, I don't have any. So when Susan asked me that question 2 years ago, it bothered me. I'm like, Hennessy asked me that. So I went digging through my boxes of evidence I've got, and I found a marriage license, a marriage certificate on my father and my mother. I found a marriage license, a marriage certificate for my father and his first wife and his third wife. Those, unfortunately, just had cursive writing. But Susan felt we could find somebody that could maybe do a comparison to Zodiac letters. And we did. We found Mike Wachsel, who first was quite skeptical, but then took the project and came back and said, I am virtually certain that the writer, his report is lengthy. It's 65, 70 pages where he compares different letters from different exemplars from different letters the Zodiac sent for different letters or things I have from my father, and makes his case for why he feels my father wrote the Zodiac letters.
Okay, we only got about 5 minutes left, okay? And then we'll do the after show after that. And we lost Susan. We lost our connection to Susan. I keep trying to pull her back in, and we can't seem to pick her back up again. So what do you want to, because we're going to be dropping Hazy in a little while. We'll still be on CJ Mars. What else do you want to leave us with before we get into the next segment?
When the book came out 5 months ago, the San Francisco Police Department public relations officer responded to all the media publicity that was coming at him. They said, if Mr. Stewart has any information, he needs to come forward. Well, they didn't know at the time that I had come forward 10 years ago and that one of their own had swabbed me. So I gave them a little time to digest that. And since then, on September 3rd, I visited with the new cold case inspector for the San Francisco Police Department over the Zodiac case. And we were together for over 2 hours. And I think he went from a little skeptical to realizing I'm just a sincere person seeking truth. And I think I presented all the evidence I have. And I truly believe that the San Francisco Police Department wants this solved. They want it over. And all of the old school guys who were involved in my case are now gone. Harold Butler's deceased. Former Chief Earl Sanders is in poor health and can't even to the point where he can't even communicate or understand. I don't believe so. Everybody's gone. Rotea's gone. Butler's gone. I believe these guys want to solve the case, and I believe that the new inspector was sincere when he told me that he's going to get down to the bottom of it.
Okay. So, Susan, anything you want to leave, because we're going to be dropping Hazy in a minute, anything you want to leave us with before we get to the after show?
There's 2 things that I think are kind of important, and that is, one, that Rotea Guilford helped investigate the Zodiac case. So it seems to reason that Earl Sanders and Harold Butler would not want it to get out that one of the detectives on the Zodiac case was married to the former wife of the Zodiac. And number 2, when Gary was talking about his mother having coffee with Earl Sanders and Earl Sanders telling her that Gary needed to drop this, that what was in that file was so heinous, that day the Zodiac case was officially closed, unsolved in San Francisco. So I found that to be a very interesting coincidence that he's telling Gary's mother to drop this case, and then the case was closed that same day.
Yeah, that is very unusual. But now, since the
Yes.
case is closed, though, can't you guys file all kinds of Freedom of Information Act requests and get the stuff?
Well, the case was reopened, I believe, in
Oh.
was 97. It was reopened soon after, I believe, Graysmith's book came out.
Yeah, it was reopened in '07 when the Fincher film came out with Downey.
Right.
I think just for convenience, because there was some hope at the time that the SFPD were going to get thousands of new credible leads because of the movie, and of course that didn't happen. And so it's officially open, and now officially. My father is officially a suspect.
Okay. I want to thank Scott Hare from Hazy for chipping in here and producing for us. And I want to thank Gary Stewart and Susan Mustafa. Okay. Okay, Susan Mustafa. You can find a link to their book on the Opperman Report blog. The book is called The Most Dangerous Animal of All, Searching for My Father and Finding the Zodiac Killer. You can also find Susan's other books, Bloodbath, I've Been Watching You, the South Louisiana Serial Killer Dismembered. Now we're gonna keep going on with the after show in a couple of minutes here. And we're going to be talking about how I don't know what happened here. Gary was somehow a suspect in a serial killing. It's a kind of a monkey wrench in the whole works here.
Yep.
And also, too, I want to get into some stuff too about social media, and there's something about true crime fans. I had to call the cops once because I was commenting on the Jodi Arias case. And I started getting, I wasn't even being that too extreme. And I started getting stalked and harassed online. I can imagine the kind of yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
extortion, yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, we'll be getting into that into the after show here. Scott, you ready to go?
Yeah, I'm set.
Okay, my friend Scott, thank you again. Say hi to Zeta for me, and God bless you. We'll be taking a little musical break here for a couple of minutes, and we'll come right back with the Opperman Report after show on CJ Mars Radio. And don't forget the after shows too. They're played on WTRU, and they're played on Para X Radio as well. They have a 3-hour show, so we're on a lot of those different shows too. Okay, we'll be right back after this break with the Opperman Report after show, brought to you by Audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. Register, get a free audio book, guys. Okay, good night. Good night, Hey Z. We'll see you next week.